in that specific process. However, on their budgeting cycle, they did not include these entities to receive transfer payments. So the funds was eventually budgeted for as goods and services. However, in the dissecting of the process, as mentioned, we've identified these to be in effect transfer payments, and the results of them not being budgeted as transfer payments and still being paid in full has resulted in unauthorized expenditure. Honourable Chairperson, when we get to the supply chain management section, we've seen an overall regression of outcomes in this specific area, where the majority of entities has reported material non-compliance issues with SCM regulations. The most common findings that we've seen here is the procurement without inviting competitive bids. We've seen the preference point system not being applied correctly, and local production and content that was not stipulated as the minimum thresholds in the specific bids. Two entities also reported, or it was reported, two entities that procurement from suppliers whose tax matters has not been declared in order by SARS has been identified. And then at the department, we've also identified expenses incurred that exceeded the actual contract value that was approved by the National Treasury. All of these factors would have then contributed to the overall increase in irregular expenditure that we've seen in the last year. When it comes to fraud and consequence management, we've assessed then whether allegations has been investigated, or if there were specific investigations, if they took longer than 6 months, and whether certain items has not been properly investigated. We've only found one instance that's where allegations was not investigated, and that related to false declarations of interest that was submitted by suppliers to the Weather Service. For the department, Sandbox and Marine Living Resource Fund, they've all investigated the instances of potential frauds and allegations that was reported, but those investigations all took longer than 6 months. Some of these investigations would have then have not been completed at the point of our audit reports or by the end of the financial year. Chairperson, then on supply chain management findings reported to management to investigate. In the current year, we've again reported to the Weather Service 2 instances where the suppliers submitted false declarations of interest. And then in a follow-up from previous year's findings, we've identified in several of those entities that, for instance, the department and Sandbox, that some of the allegations that we've reported in the past has been investigated, where at the Weather Service, those false declarations, as I just mentioned, was not investigated in the prior year. Overall snapshot then of the portfolio, we've not seen any clean reports for the last 2 years or 3 years in the portfolio. In this slide, we indicate 2 years. That's definitely room for improvement then. In terms of the financial unqualified audits, that overall we've seen an improvement from 29% to 57% of the portfolio. In the findings identified or reported in performance, in the overall performance report, we've also seen an improvement. And unfortunately, in the compliance matters, it remained consistent where all entities reported non-compliance. The irregular expenditure, however, as a result of these non-compliance, have definitely increased quite a bit. Perhaps just the 2.9 billion that is the overall balance within the portfolio at the moment includes then items that was identified in the last year pertaining to previous years as well, as our slide have mentioned. Honourable Chairperson, when we look at the specific root causes, we classified them to the slow response, to improve key controls in addressing the risk areas. We found that at most of the entities and the department, we've not seen perhaps the urgency in improving the risk and the control environment, or alternatively, it is a very slow process to have these controls overall implemented and effective. As you'd understand, our audit reports does come quite late into the next financial year, so drastic action and immediate interventions is normally required for the remainder of the financial year, at least for the controls to be implemented. So if we indicate at the department that those urgencies are not there, for instance, we have seen at least an improvement, so there are a lot that has improved. However, the need for specific further areas to improve, like the immovable tangible capital assets and irregular expenditure, has then remained as our root cause in the previous year. We've also seen inadequate consequences for poor performance and transgressions. This perhaps relates specifically to the compliance issues that we have identified, where individuals are not held accountable for their behavior, and sometimes non-compliance can be seen as tolerable, that we've identified at the entities indicated there. And lastly, the instability or vacancies in key positions that's really is similar to what we've reported before in the Marine Living Resource Fund, and hopefully with the department's intervention there in the 2020-21 year, one would expect to see an improvement. Chairperson, we come to our overall recommendations to both the department and its entities, as well as the committee. We've indicated that meticulousness and timely implementation of audit action plans are key to ensure that errors in reported information do not reoccur and internal control deficiencies are addressed. So we are placing quite a bit of emphasis on those action plans to be developed in several of these entities. We have had debrief sessions with management, also plan to have debrief sessions with management to co-review audit action plan and see that they do address the root causes that we've identified during our audits. The second bullet that we've mentioned, preventive and detective internal controls are required across all entities to ensure adherence to supply chain management regulations and laws. Staff needs to better understand the requirements of laws and regulations to ensure that there are adequate planning and procedural execution within procurement cycles. Supply chain management has got a lot of attention over the last year, as it has its direct impact on irregular expenditure, Chairperson. And due to that, it is critical that the required attention and the internal control mechanisms be in place to ensure that compliance is checked throughout and continuously in the cycles. That is what we're trying to recommend and highlight specifically in this point. To Honourable Chairperson, your committee, we have then added 2 recommendations. The first recommendation is to instruct to those charged with governance should ensure that there is an adequate resource and working internal audit and risk function that identifies internal control deficiencies and recommend corrective actions timelessly at all the entities in the portfolio, with a dire focus on submitting quality financial and performance reports. Chairperson, we've spoken earlier that there are these functioning internal audit bodies. It is now to enaction them and ensure that the work that they perform does eventually give assurance that quality financial and performance reports is ultimately prepared. The second bullet to that is that the portfolio committee should monitor the implementation of action plans against regressive audit outcomes, especially those relating to non-compliance, to address audits of key concern and internal control deficiencies identified during our audits. This should keep management accountable and empower the accounting authorities or officers to implement consequence management stipulations. Our focus here is on, as our first, or talks directly to the first bullet of recommendations to the department and its entities to develop those action plans, and that they be held accountable for the action plans, even to this committee and by this committee, on a continuous basis, to ensure that there are improvements in the overall portfolio outcomes. Chairperson, I'm going to hand over to my executive to take us just through the closing slides in this presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think from our side, so Daniel, if you can just manage the slides for me, please. What this slide talks about is that obviously from the Auditor General side, we not only trying to identify what are the key issues, we also have been having several interactions with the various accountability structures, being the accounting authorities, accounting officers, and also the oversight structures, to try and also influence the importance of internal controls and also the importance of preventative controls. As you can see from left to right, we talk about regular engagements. We've also introduced the status of record review. Status of record review is where we go and review key areas even during, let's say, first or second quarter of the financial year. We then give a follow-up information back to the accounting officer or accounting authority for them to also know the status of where they are currently with their action plans. We've also done roadshows. You will remember the Auditor General also embarked on quite a number of roadshows during his tenure, and then also in terms of frequent engagement with oversight being yourself. We've also had some frequent, we've also over the last couple of years also started to also build relationships with the portfolio committees, also trying to also then support them in how they also execute their oversight over these different audits or entities and departments. We go to the next slide, Daniel. So from this, what we've also done is then there have been guides developed. These guides then focus specifically on what's the importance of preventative controls, and then also in terms of what accounting officers should consider in terms of their awareness and accounting authorities, but also talks to actual oversight structures as to for them to also take note of exactly as to what are the functions and responsibilities of these accounting officers and accounting authorities, and also what they need to do, and also from an oversight structure. And go to the next slide, Daniel, please. As you can see, there are about 6 guides. It talks about the importance of preventative controls, just highlighting the preventative controls and the importance thereof, the tone and culture, institutionalizing internal controls, and then procurement and financial statements and asset management. As you can see, that guide 4 and 5 and 6 obviously covers quite the areas that are most susceptible to misstatements when we actually go and actually audit those financial statements. Those are the key risk areas. Go to the next slide, please. Then what is included in the guides? So like I mentioned earlier, what is very important in these guides, it talks about the controls accounting officers and accounting authorities should implement. It talks about the questions oversight structures and executive authorities could ask to obtain assurance. This will also then focus on yourselves being the portfolio committee. It also then refers to why it's important, and most important, it also refers to applicable legislation that actually supports as to why these internal controls are necessary and how it actually links to the applicable legislation. As you will know that in the PFMA and MFMA, there are quite specific instructions for consequence management and who takes responsibility after specific entities or departments or municipalities, etc. I think that concludes our presentation. I thank you, Daniel, for presenting. I think we'll take some questions now. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair and members.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before we take questions, as indicated earlier, we will allow the Minister to introduce the new DG, who is almost at the center of what we are talking about here as the accounting office. Honorable Minister, at the earliest of the meeting, hear from you, who is our new DG formally. So I would welcome you and indicate as indicated earlier, and I will now allow you to introduce the new DG.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning to all members of the committee. I believe we do have new members from the Democratic Alliance, and I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome those new members to our committee. Chairperson, I'm together also with the Deputy Minister, and I think that she would join me in wishing committee members all the best for this year. I think that it has not started on a good note, and I think we all understand it's going to be a very difficult year at a personal level. But we do hope that committee members are staying safe and that we will, under these very difficult circumstances, continue to work together. Chair, Ms. Nomfundo Chabalala is the new Director General of the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, and she is together with us this morning. I think that it's very significant that we should be, that she should be attending this first meeting where we are discussing the outcomes of the audit of the 2019-20 financial year. Let me say, Chairperson, that on behalf of the department, I would like to apologize to the Portfolio Committee for the audit outcomes. I think that we had indicated previously that we would do everything we could to try and get the department back to an unqualified audit. You will see from the presentation that we will do later that we have made progress, but I think that we have to acknowledge in this meeting that we have failed. And I think we also have to acknowledge that the rot is much deeper than we had initially anticipated. And we will share with you when we do our presentation exactly what we are doing in terms of consequence management in this regard. But allow me to ask Ms. Chabalala to turn her camera on and to unmute herself and to greet the committee. Ms. Chabalala, as everybody knows, has extensive experience in governance and extensive experience in dealing with financial matters. And it is our hope that she will be able to help us with some of these very complex and difficult questions that the Auditor General has been highlighting this morning. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, DM. Good morning to the Honorable Chairperson and Honorable members and the rest of the colleagues present here. As already introduced, my name is Nomfundo Chabalala, the new DG in the department. I think one obviously is looking forward to working with the committee, but most of it all is ensuring that as a department we do work on some of the challenges that the department is facing, make sure there's proper controls in place, and ensure that the department carries out its mandate and utilize the resources that we are then is entrusted on us as a department, obviously approved by the Parliament, and following the RAND in servicing the people of this country. So I am offering myself, working together with my colleagues and also working together with the Minister, DM, in collaborating and ensuring that we fulfill our mandate, and looking forward to the engagements with the committee and also your oversight will also assist in also ensuring that as a department, we actually are servicing the people of the country in line with our mandates. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome. And we wanted to do it formally as we start asking questions so that you also take notes freely. Can I now ask honorable members to those who want to ask questions on the Auditor General's report to raise their hands? I'm still trying to check if I can see
my hand is raised,
your
Chair.
hand. Honorable Paulson, in the meantime, Okay, I can see Honorable Paulson. Who else is there? Honorable Paulson, you are number 1. Honorable Bryant, number 2. Can I take those hands? Can you start, Honorable Paulson?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Minister, DM, the department, and other honourable members, and welcome to the new DG, Ms. Nomfundo Chabalala. And you have your work cut out for you, ma'am, and I'm sure that your previous experience would serve this department well, where you served as head of the Gauteng Province Provincial Treasury, and you received several accolades for your work. So I think we for once, I have some confidence that we are heading in the right direction, and that we can see this department working towards achieving its mandate, reducing the irregular expenditure, which is quite substantial. And I want to ask the Auditor General's Office, so that in terms of working towards achieving a clean audit, how will this process unfold where you work with the department and in terms of your engagement, so that we don't sit here in a year's time and have a similar scenario, because it's for 2 years now we've had similar performance for this department, and this department has been racked with poor management, and it's we get to start the year anew. We start with a new DG, so we wouldn't want this DG to be left without knowing what is the path that she should follow. So we'd like to know, in terms of the engagement with the Auditor General's Office, how would that unfold going forward? Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Honorable Bryant.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Again, from our side, a big welcome to the DG, Ms. Chabalala. And as Honourable Paulson has already mentioned, she certainly does have a work cut out for her going forward, if one takes the presentation that we've just received as anything to go by. Obviously, the major challenge that's come out of that presentation that's presented itself to us today are the issues around irregular expenditure. And, we hear this slightly euphemistic term of procurement without inviting competitive bids. I think we know what that really is referring to. And the key question here is in terms of consequence management. And I think our committee going forward, in line with the recommendations that were made on page 27, that we need to get more feedback in terms of the outcomes of those investigations. And I see the Minister very kindly has already offered to provide us with ongoing feedback in terms of mitigation measures that are going to be taken going forward. But I think it's vitally important that we actually start to see what action is being taken, because certainly in many of these instances, it's not just about contractors not being able to deliver. A lot of it is far deeper, and I hope that between the efforts of the Minister and the new DG, we can really start to get to the nub of these issues and improve the level of service from within those entities. Thank you.
I can see a third hand, Honorable Phillips.
Good morning, and yes, thank you so much for that very depressing report on a very depressing morning. I would just like to request if we can have a list of the companies who were awarded contracts without competitive bids taking place. Also a list of the suppliers whose tax matters are not in order. And then also a list submitted of false declarations and intents that were submitted by who they were submitted by. I'd really like, appreciate that information. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Can we allow by the way, the department is still going to present. Can we allow the Auditor General's office to respond?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, honourable members. I think based on the very first question from Mr. Paulson, and honourable member Paulson, what we have been doing in the past for the last 2 years, once we have concluded the audit, we actually then have a detailed workshop with the department. We ask them to prepare an action plan addressing our findings, but also then most importantly is to then really assess what is the root cause of the actual finding, and then we would then evaluate, take them through, and also then have a discussion as to what is the appropriate action going forward. So we have been walking this journey with them. We'll be doing again the same this year after the audit, since we only concluded in late December. We will still have that workshop probably in the next month or two. We will have a discussion with the department. We'll set out, and we'll also make sure that that plan is also then escalated through to the audit committee, where the audit committee will then also be the responsible structure to actually then make sure that plan gets monitored on a quarterly basis, and then they would also monitor the actions thereof. So I think that is from our side what we do. We also then try to build a working relationship with them, with the department. And one thing we also do is we also do an interim audit. We also look at whether or not the department will be able to have interim audits where we come in after 6 months or after 9 months of the financial year. We will then come and do a review of the significant areas, and we'll then also provide feedback to the accounting officer as to where they are currently in terms of those, let's say, challenging or misstatement areas we had in the previous financial year. So that is some of the actions that we do from our side. We really try and do help the department where we can in terms of also improving the audit outcomes. Okay. Regarding Honourable Bryant, regarding the comment on irregular expenditure, I think yes, one thing from our side, what we are doing is that you'll note that in terms of the PFMA, there's also certain consequence management that the accounting officer needs to execute in terms of complying with the PFMA. So what we are doing, we're also tracking that from our side. What we've also done is then we've also only reported on the consequence management that was affected during the financial year under review. We've had discussions with the previous acting DG and also with the minister, and there has been some additional actions taken that we've not yet looked at. But as you can see, the minister is already taking some consequence management in this regard, and I think it will definitely have a review during our interim period. We will also obviously then just to make sure as to what exactly has been done, but there is definitely some movement happening in terms of the consequence management from the department. Then for Honourable Member Phillips, I think regarding the list of suppliers and false declarations, I think that will be, we'll have to engage the department, work through the department and ask if they can submit that information to the portfolio committee as requested. That will be then the questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Otherwise, thank you very much, Mr. Eugene and your team. We appreciate the presentation, and I hope we'll all be able to take it from here and see how do we move forward. Can we now ask the department first introduced by the Minister to make their presentation. Honorable Minister.
Chair, can I request that we start, because I think that before we get on to the annual performance report, I think that it's appropriate, given the questions that honourable members have been asking, I think that it's appropriate to begin with the CFO giving a report on the audit outcomes, so that colleagues are asking, what are we doing? And I think that it's important that the CFO responds on that. And I would also then want to suggest, Chairperson, that we allow Mr. Abada, who, as you know, up until the end of last week was the acting DG, you allow him to do the presentation on consequence management. And I think that these two presentations will then answer the broad question, which Honourable Bryant was asking as to what is the action plan to deal with this from the side of the department. And then we can get into questions relating to the annual report. So if I can hand over to the CFO with your permission, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning. Sorry, Chairperson. Thank you, Minister, and good morning to the Deputy Minister, the Chairperson, and the honourable members of the committee and the colleagues present here today. Chairperson, the presentation I will make has got two issues. One of it relates to which is just 2 slides. It won't take too long. It will be relating to the performance of the Department on Expenditure, and then the majority of the presentation talks to the audit outcome and the work that
let's deal with the issue of financial performance when we come to the annual report. What we want you to do now is the audit outcomes, please.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Can we please move the slide? I think it should be on slide number. Okay, can we move again? Yes, again. Thank you. All right, just one slide back. Another slide back. And number 7. Chairperson, slide number 7 just gives a history of the audit outcomes of the department. 2017-18, we were sitting on adverse with audit findings. 2018-19, we had a qualified audit opinion with findings, and those findings, we had 11 paragraphs of qualification. In 2019-20, Chairperson, we are still qualified, which we are not really proud of. What has happened in this case, we have been able to remove 8 of the qualification points or paragraphs, and we are left with 3, of which 2 of them deals with the irregular expenditure and the one is on immovable assets. Next slide. Just a background, Chair, to a report which the Auditor General has spoken to. We were meant to submit the financials on the 31st of July, and given the environment that we worked in during COVID and the capacity issues that it presented us with as a department, and with the fact that we could not really fully implement our audit action plan, under those conditions, we then formally asked National Treasury to allow us to present the financials for audit purposes on the 30th of September. That it remains an issue of non-compliance, but then we were able then to submit on the 30th of September as requested to National Treasury. And then the next slide, Chairperson, we are giving an account of what happened during the 2 months that we requested. to be able to improve on the audit outcomes. The department chairperson had an audit turnaround strategy, which was presented to the portfolio committee on the 8th of October 2019, and also on the 4th of November 2019. This audit action plan or the turnaround strategy was tracked on a quarterly basis by the audit and the risk committee. The department reported there on a quarterly basis since the 4th of November. And chairperson, we have been able to then improve the results in terms of the reduction of the qualification points, and we will give the details of that in the next slides. Slide number 10. On this slide, chairperson, we reflect that on the immovable and tangible capital assets, which was one of the qualification points, we have been able to resolve the issues around the accounting for these assets, except for the part relating to the Section 42 transfers of completed project, which remains a qualification paragraph. And we will refer to that when we talk about the current audit qualification and the audit action plan, which we are busy finalizing in the department as we speak. We had an issue, chairperson, around the overstatement of accruals. This matter has been resolved, and therefore, as much as I say in the action plan, it's not applicable that we do something about it, but at the end of the day, after we have resolved the matter, we need to make sure that we sustain the results. So there would be measures that we still continue with, but they are not at the level of a qualification, chairperson. And then we had a matter of overstatement of commitments. This matter has also been resolved. We will definitely put it on a plan that deals with sustainability going forward. Slide number 11. We had an issue, chairperson, that deals with goods and services, which is a very material item of expenditure in the department. This matter has also been resolved. It deals with in the main, it is our environmental programs where we implement projects through the EPWP framework, and we've got expenditure that we deal with in this area through the implementing entities. And there's always issues in terms of the model that we were utilizing, which we are now moving out of on a phased in basis. And we have been able to resolve the challenges that we had in this area, chairperson. And also such issues will still sit on a plan that seeks to make sure that we maintain the results. The expenditure for capital assets, that was another item, chairperson, which dealt more about the separation of the capital spent from the current expenditure, and also it dealt with work in progress on the project in EPWP, or one of our programs called EPIP. This matter has also been resolved, and I would still say, chairperson, will put it on a plan for sustainability so that we do not regress. Slide number 12. We had an issue, chairperson, around the prepayments and advances, and this matter has also been resolved through the audit action plan that we put in place since the audit results of 2018-19. And then the next slide, chairperson, takes us to the current results. Oh no, it's still the continuation of the 2018 results, and as how did we improve that? As at the 23rd of December, Chair, that was the date on which we got our audit report. So that's why the slides are showing that it's a report of improvements achieved as at that date. We had an issue with irregular expenditure in 2018-19. That matter, it was part of the audit plan. We have been able, Chairperson, compared to the past, 2018-19, in 1920, the department reported largely the irregular expenditure that we had, in particular that came from the previous years and the current year, but we have not been able to completely resolve this matter, and therefore it is still subject of a lot of work to be done in the current year to be able to ensure that we are accurate in our reporting and also ensure that we've got the necessary controls in place that would make sure that wherever first price is to prevent, to make sure that we do not incur, and the second price is that wherever it happens, if it did not get picked up by our controls, we need to be able then to detect any problem and report it and address it appropriately. We also had, Chairperson, a problem of completeness of reporting on fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and in particular, the transactions that happened at our implementing entities or agents. This matter has been resolved. We've been able to report that fruitless and wasteful expenditure. In particular, the biggest number came from our environmental programs in infrastructure. And the matter that is still remaining to be resolved in this area is the consequence management coming out of that. A lot of the items that we have in this case, we have done letters of demand and so on, but we need to finalize appropriately the whole exercise of ensuring that we account properly for the fruitless and wasteful expenditure incurred in this area. Slide number 14. Slide number 14, Chairperson, it gives us the picture as we have it for 2019-20. This is the final audit report. We are still qualified. We have been able to reduce the matters of qualification from 11 to 3. And the first part is the irregular expenditure, which has got 2 paragraphs. You'd see that we've got point 1 and 2, but irregular expenditure has got 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph is about the amount that we reported, the 2.6 billion. There were issues in terms of its accuracy from the payment side, and that is a matter that we need to finalize on. And the second bullet talks about other irregular expenditure which were not picked up by our controls, and that came out during the audit. In particular, areas that are below 500,000, and also areas that happened at our implementing entities. So that is the challenges that we have to eliminate as we finalize the 2020-21 audit. Slide number 15. Slide number 15, Chair, it gives us the last qualification point, which is paragraph number 3, which is about the recording and keeping of records and appropriate handover certificates. As the AG has explained, we built infrastructure such as buyback centers, landfill sites, and we also do tourism infrastructure in provincial tourism agencies, and these infrastructure projects, when they are completed, we need to transfer them signed off by our accounting officer to the accounting officer of the relevant entity, either at a municipality level or provincial level. And that is the shortcoming that we had in this area in the transfers that we have done or the project that we have completed. And therefore, this matter also remains to be finalized with the finalization of the audit for 2020-21. We've got the action plan in place to deal with these issues, and we hope that we will be able to remove this item come the end of the year, Chairperson. Can we? Yeah. There is, I think that marks the end, Chairperson, of this presentation on the audit outcome and the improvements we've done. And then we've got a slide which the acting DG will take us through on the consequence management. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Deputy Minister. Good morning. Good morning, honourable members. If Secretary can just load the presentation for us, please. Thank you. Let's move to the first slide. As indicated by the Minister earlier, we are going to do this presentation just to explain what we have done in the time after the AG's report. What the AG identified was that there were 24 tenders that were irregularly awarded and resulted in the irregular expenditure during the 2018-2019 financial year. Subsequently, the Minister mandated an investigation, a forensic investigation, to determine exactly what had happened. That investigation looked at the reasons for the tenders that were being irregularly awarded, whether the department suffered any losses, whether the department received value for money, whether there were any officials or third parties that had committed any acts of fraud and or corruption, and also whether any person or persons could be held liable in law for this irregular expenditure. Essentially, the overall finding of the investigation confirmed what the AG's findings were, and that the AG's findings were valid with regard to the objectivity of tender criteria in particular. Next slide, please. Thank you. Honourable members, we've broken down the number of tenders. So out of the 24, there were 13 tenders that had a multi-contract value of 866 odd million. But the expenditure for the 2018-19 year in particular was roughly around 152 million. So what the investigation found in these particular tenders was that there was no evidence to indicate the presence of favoritism for any one bidder, or that any fraudulent motives existed on the part of the members of the bid evaluation committee and the bid adjudication committees. They also found that in these 13 tenders, there was no loss suffered by the department, and that the department had received value for money due to the fact that the bid was awarded to the lowest quoting bidder that had in fact met the criteria. The recommendations from the report were that we implement the recommendations with regard to improvements to our supply chain management procedures, and they made some recommendations in the actual investigation report. So the action was obviously for us to improve our supply chain management initiatives. Then the second recommendation in this regard was that we would have to apply to National Treasury for condonation for these particular tenders. There are, however, certain prerequisites that need to be met before we can actually do that application for condonation to Treasury. We did do it in this particular instance, but they required obviously evidence of the consequence management before that condonation could be granted, and the disciplinary actions are still in process in relation to that, and that's one of the prerequisites that Treasury requires to be met. Next slide. Out of the 24, we've dealt with 13. The next 5 tenders had a contract value of a multi-year contract value rather of 135 million rand approximately, and the expenditure for that particular financial year was 45 million rand approximately. The Findings of the investigation were that the bid evaluation committees for these tenders failed to apply due care during their evaluation, as they overlooked certain irregularities. They also found in terms of the evidence illustrated that the bid evaluation committee members have committed various acts of financial misconduct, including misrepresentation to the bid adjudication committee. The recommendations were that we implement improvements to the supply chain management, and also that disciplinary action be initiated. In terms of the actions, we've looked at our supply chain improvements and we started initiating those. Also in terms of the disciplinary actions, that's still in process. Next slide. The next three tenders had a multi-year contract value of 379 million, and for the 2018-19 year, it was roughly around 50 million. What the findings were in terms of the investigation, they found prima facie evidence illustrating elements of preferential treatment to two selected bidders with regard to two of the three contracts. For the remaining tender, there was no evidence to indicate the presence of favoritism for any one bidder. And obviously, this particular one will be treated in the same way as the 13 that were initially mentioned. So in two of the tenders, the investigation evidence has confirmed that, in fact, officials have committed acts of fraud. The recommendations were, again, improvements to the supply chain management procedures, that the department should initiate disciplinary action, that the matter also be reported in terms of Section 34 of the Prevention of Corrupt Activities Act to the South African Police Services, and also that we apply to National Treasury for the one tender that was similar to the 13 that I mentioned in one of my previous slides. In terms of the actions, we've already initiated supply chain management improvements. The disciplinary actions are still in process. The matter is or has been reported to the South African Police Services. The case number is indicated on the slide, and obviously application will be made to National Treasury after the conclusion of the disciplinary action. Next slide. Thank you. Here again, we're dealing with three tenders. The multi-year contract value was 3 million, and the expenditure for that particular year was 141 million. The findings were once again prima facie evidence illustrating that irregular appointments arose as a result of fraud, misconduct, and possible corruption by officials of the department. It was also found that officials misrepresented information to the bid adjudication committee. Then there were findings also of poor project management by officials of the department, and that the actions of these officials resulted in the fruitless and wasteful expenditure. My apologies for the amounting there, that shouldn't have been on the slide. In terms of the recommendations, obviously, once again, we needed to ensure that there's improvement in terms of our supply chain management procedure. They also recommended precautionary suspension of these officials. I'm sure members would have been aware in the media that we initially the suspension for two officials were lifted. We did initiate disciplinary actions. They are still in process. And also, as I mentioned before, we've reported the matter to the South African Police Services. Oops. Oh, we lost him. Honorable Chair, I'm not sure whether you're hearing us.
Yes, I do.
Okay, our screen has disappeared here. But in terms of the recommendations for the supply chain improvements, Chair, one of the recommendations was that the department should revise its functionality criteria for tenders so that there's compliance with the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. And then also the second recommendation was we should revise our practice of appointing the same officials to serve on the selection committee and the evaluation committees. The specification committees and evaluation committees. And that the functions of these two committees should be segregated so that we minimize the risk of collusion between officials. Then the third recommendation was that we should implement a system so that the specification committees, evaluation committees, and adjudication committees are mechanically recorded, and these recordings should be filed for future reference. So as at the 23rd of December, we implemented the first recommendation. In terms of the appointing of some of the officials or different officials for the different committees, it's not yet been formally implemented. We've informally started the process already, but our formal implementation date is the 1st of March. But in terms of the tenders that we have evaluated already, this has been done. So the specification committee, evaluation committee, and the bid adjudication committees are separate. Then in terms of the mechanical recording, so far, because of the COVID issue, we've been implementing these meetings through the MS Teams platform. So that's actually met the requirement from the recommendations. But we'll also be procuring recording devices when we go into actual meetings. And when we conduct physical meetings post-COVID. Next slide. Next slide, please. My apologies, Chair. I'm not seeing the slides on the screen, and I'm not sure whether the slides move. Can I just give me a second, Chair? We're just trying to see if we can project the slide again.
Move one more slide. Yeah, that's right.
If you can go on to slide 9, I can talk to slide 9 while we're trying to sort out our connectivity issue here. So in terms of the recommendations on slide 9, Chair, the Supply Chain Management Directorate should ensure that all minutes of meetings are prepared within a reasonable period and are also filed for future reference. And then these minutes should also be signed by the relevant officials present at such meetings. As I said, we are recording these meetings in terms of whichever platform is being used. But also there's physical recording and minutes that are being taken by members of the committee and the supply chain management practitioners. And there's also a requirement now that we have our ensure Please. Just in terms of the performance highlights, Chair, I'm getting a bit of feedback on there. If I can ask that others mute, please, Chair. The program 2, legal authorizations, compliance and enforcement. What the highlights there that are that 234 enforcement notices were issued for non-compliances with environmental legislation. We had 56 criminal cases that were finalized, where dockets were handed over to the National Prosecuting Authority. Under Program 3, the Oceans and Coasts, we had implementation of the Coastal Water Quality Monitoring Program. It was implemented in 23 priority sites in the 4 coastal provinces. We also had peer-reviewed scientific publications, including theses and research policy reports. We had 20 of these that were peer-reviewed. Under Program 4, Climate Change, Air Quality and Sustainable Development, we had adaptation interventions, 5 of them that were implemented through civil society organizations with the support from the government of Flanders. Also under this program, we had 4 out of 4 annual pollution prevention plans processed in line with our regulations. Next slide, please. Under Program 5, we, as far as the expansion of the conservation estate went, we extended it by 0.14%. To 15.74% of land under conservation, which roughly translates into about 19,209,923 hectares, and then about 6.5 million odd hectares of state managed protected areas were assessed with a MET score, the Management Effectiveness Tracking Tool score, that was above 67%. Then also in terms of the United Nations Convention to combat desertification, there was a drought management plan that was developed. In terms of the biodiversity entrepreneurs, 446 entrepreneurs were trained during that year. Under Program 6, our environmental programs, we created 73,568 work opportunities. Of those, 53,192 youth benefited in terms of the implementation of these programs, and then 1,852 wildfires were suppressed. Under Program 7, which is our chemicals and waste management, the Mercury Management National Action Plan was finalized, and then we conducted 30 environmental performance assessments during that year. In terms of our key performance challenges, air quality management, the planned number of monitoring stations reporting to Southwest was missed. This resulted from equipment failures as a result of numerous power outages. Then we were also plagued by burglaries and vandalism in some of the stations, and this also affected the performance of our instruments. Then in terms of the implementation of environmental programs, there were extensive delays in terms of the project start dates as a result of adjustments to contracts to allow work to proceed and also to comply with accounting and financial management and reporting frameworks. The delays impacted a number of planned outputs in this program. We also had issues around performance of contractors in relation to poor workmanship, which resulted in this work having to be corrected. Then we also had an implementer who had to be suspended that was dealing with the process, and he was under investigation for fraud and corruption. Then another performance that we had was entire processing capacity. In terms of our plan, we were up to 50% process for recycle. That was about 85,000 tons.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. I will go through the Program 1 performance information and then hand over to the colleague who will do Program 2. The slide that is showing up here, slide number 10, Chairperson, in terms of the guideline that you've given us, the performance, the target that we did not meet as a department is to get an external audit opinion, which is unqualified. And we have spoken largely to this performance indicator as to why we are where we're sitting now and the improvements that we've put in place. Slide number 11. In terms of slide number 11, Chairperson, in Program 1, we've got a target here which speaks to the number of investor projects funded. This is the work where the department looks for investors outside of government to invest in certain tourism opportunities. This work had started within the year, but we've not been able to close the deals on it. And the work was still in progress during the year. And the department will continue to promote other projects using the diverse promotion platforms. In terms of the percentage vacancy rate, Chairperson, our target for the year was 8%. We did not meet the target. We were sitting for the year at 12.3% as at the 31st of March. We continue, Chairperson, to put plans in place to deal with this matter of the vacancy rate, given the capacity problems that we have in terms of also performance that it shows in other areas. So the department is in a process of fast-tracking the filling of posts that have been prioritized. Here, Chairperson, we've got a target of meeting 50% of women in the senior management cohort. This target, we've been able to reach 43%, and we're also not doing well in this case. And the department continues to prioritize the filling of SMS members with female candidates, Chairperson. In terms of information communication and technology systems developed and implemented, we had a target of 3 systems. We've been able to achieve 2 of the 3. and only one which is called BAPS that has not yet been tested, Chairperson. The next slide. On this slide, Chairperson, the last area that has been a problem deals with the number of beneficiaries benefiting from environmental capacity development programs. We had a target in this case, Chairperson, to, in terms of training of the trainer CAPS program that we had to develop. This process had started and we were busy with the engagement of stakeholders in terms of the project plan. And this could not be finalized due to the COVID-19 lockdown, and an online meeting to finalize the program with the sector partners is scheduled to take place in the 2020-21 financial year, Chairperson. Next. I think that should be program 2. So in overall, program 1, Chairperson, we achieved 65% and 35% were in progress, and then we had no target that was not started, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Frances Craigie. I'm the acting DDG currently of Legal Authorizations, Compliance and Enforcement. So quickly, just to go through the targets that we were off target on. The first one is the percentage of administrative enforcement instructions complied with. You'll see that the annual target there was 75%. And in terms of the actual progress, we only got to 53%, although with regard to our pre-compliance notices, that was up to 62%. I think the difficulty with this target is it is very much not within the control of us as officials. And so it is whether there's compliance to certain of our notices. And in this particular case, we had issued quite a lot of notices within a new sector of landowners. And we did see, unfortunately, not very high levels of compliance and subsequently have taken further action. And this current financial year, we're seeing a much better performance. If you move to the next, see two sums of minor in this year, the annual action plan. And I think where we were just off target around work, we were on salary. We were really trying to look across all the different provincial agencies as well as parks. The scalable and appropriate for changes. And we the
certain things that need to be up to our application